Your Royal Highness, Vice Presidents and Trust officials, honoured guests and members, welcome to the 80th Annual General Meeting of the Wrens Benevolent Trust. 80 years of delivering benevolence to those in need is a significant milestone, and it's truly a privilege to stand before you today as the Chairman, and I ask you to reflect on the many ladies who have gone before myself and my current team and their selfless commitment and contribution over all those years. This has allowed the Trust to evolve and flourish into the modern and relevant organisation it is today. If Dame Vera is looking down upon us today, I hope she is pleased with what has been achieved and continues to be achieved by the Trust, following her personal drive and imagination to bring the Trust to life in 1942. It is also a huge privilege to be able to use Merchant Taylors' Hall for this milestone meeting, and the Trust is most grateful to the Clerk, Admiral John Clink, and his team for their support in making today possible. To open proceedings today, I'd now like to invite the Beadle of the Merchant Taylors' Hall, Mr. Andy Fell, to give us a very brief history of this superb venue. Andy.
Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Merchant Taylors. As a veteran Royal Navy man of 36 years, I am very honoured to be standing in front of such a wonderful audience today. Merchant Taylors is the only livery company still on its original site. The site itself was acquired in 1331 by John de Yakesley. They started building in 1347 and completed the hall in 1392. It was then known as Taylorshaw. Threadneedle Street was originally called Braid Street, and in approximately 1650 earned the name Threadneedle Street. In total, there are 110 livery companies set in order of precedence. Merchant Taylors sit at number 6, and the Skinners Company sit at number 7 at the moment. There are only 2 companies that change position on the list, and they are Merchant Taylors and Skinners. You may have heard of the saying, at 6s and 7s. This comes from the tempestuous history between Merchant Taylors and the Skinners Company. It was a fight for precedence and political power. In 1484, the Lord Mayor of London, Robert Bilston, a haberdasher, had had enough of the fighting and bloodshed on the streets of London. And with the agreement of each master of the 2 companies, he made a decision to simply swap places every 12 months. So since 1484, at Mansion House, the 2 masters, their wardens, the clerk and the beadles, with the Lord Mayor of the City of London, carry out the exchange of gavels ceremony, where 2 gavels are swapped from one master to the other. One gavel has a 6 on it, and the other a 7. So simple. The Bilston Award is still celebrated today with 2 annual dinners between the companies. On September the 2nd, 1666, the Great Fire of London began. Flames crept towards the hall and reached Threadneedle Street on Tuesday the 4th of September. While the Great Fire gutted the hall, the walls and foundations remained, and a fortunate change of wind spared other areas of the hall. Fire once again ravaged the hall during the Blitz. On the night of the 17th of September 1940, at least 8 incendiary bombs struck the building. The panelling and timbers of the Great Hall were ideal fuel for the flames. In 1948, a reconstruction committee was set up. Money and building materials were in short supply. Progress was slow. A court member suggested abandoning any restoration and to open as purely a luncheon club. The court reacted, stating the hall is essential to the nature of a company, and a company without a hall is like a snail without a shell. The vote was taken, and work started in earnest. Work was completed in the late 50s, and in 1959 the hall in all its glory was declared open once more with a lavish livery dinner. In 1960, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was offered membership of the company and accepted. The first Queen of England to be a merchant tailor since Anne of Bohemia, Richard II's Queen. This was a sign of brighter times ahead. So the merchant tailors emerged and developed into the modern company you see today. A proud tradition of providing young people with bright futures. We have close ties with 18 schools around Britain. Our current priorities: funding educational opportunities for disadvantaged students, empowering company members to actively participate and engage in our educational work. Philanthropy has been at the heart of Merchant Taylors since it was founded as a fraternity in the early 1300s. The Merchant Taylors Foundation awards grants to charities and community organisations which tackle some form of disadvantage and operate exclusively in the London boroughs of Hackney, Lewisham, Southwark and Tower Hamlets. Also, we support 5 military affiliations. This includes HMS Heron and the 2nd Mine Countermeasure Squadron. In 2020, we had our first female master, Mrs. Jane Hall, immediately followed by our 2nd female master, Lady Annie Harding, who is our current master today. The pandemic has hit the company hard, like many others, but I believe we are emerging from it stronger and have a clear path ahead. Thank you for your time and enjoy your afternoon. Thank you.
Grateful thanks to Andy for that, and I think setting the scene for us for the rest of the afternoon. Moving on, I would now like to invite Mrs. Ollie Butler, one of our trustees, to deliver an ode that she has specially written to mark the 80th anniversary of the Trust.
Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, 80 years of benevolence. I thought when I was asked to do this, where do I start? So I thought, well, let's start at the very beginning. That's a very fine place to start. I shan't be singing it, by the way. The year was 1940, and times were getting hard, not only on the Western Front, but here in our own backyard. Casualties were soaring as people joined the fight, leaving homes and loved ones to do what they thought right. Director Wrens, with insight, foresaw what lay ahead. A veteran of the First World War, it filled her thoughts with dread. Contact with the powers that be sowed a tiny seed to provide for the women's service the help that they might need. With Admiralty approval, Dame Vera forged ahead. To be in line with the men's BT is how it would be led. It needed thought and planning, they had to get it done, the target up and running before the war was won. A 1-0 was seconded, H. Overy was her name, to write a constitution, her primary aim. She had to give it structure to pass the test of time, to make it fit for purpose. It didn't have to rhyme. She travelled round the UK, north, south, east and west, visiting all units, some at their request, promoting and researching as organisers do, collecting thoughts and input from the girls who served in blue. They formed a new committee at almost every base to take the movement forward and put her plans in place. The Constitution drafted, Central Committee met, 7 potential governors trying not to fret. The inaugural meeting, held in April 42, 100 plus attended to see what they could do. Dame Vera chaired the actions, put things to the vote. The then Queen as our patron, the Trust was born with hope. Princess Marina as president was duly voted in. All nominees elected, the business could begin. Suggestions were put forward, plans and options read. The Constitution motioned and received the go-ahead. Next requirement, funding to satisfy the need. A day's pay from Wren's serving was formally agreed. Military charities, KGFS the first one, donated sums of money and benevolence begun. The number helped in that first year at 39 was low. With enlisted numbers rising, this sum was bound to grow. with grants for medical expenses that often were quite high, red bills and final letters that would make a rich man cry. One wren, while she was serving, sadly lost her leg. She was crudely given a rather ugly peg. Life ahead for that poor girl was looking rather grim. The trust stumped up the funding for an artificial limb. As the war continued, so too did demand. Smaller cases handed locally in every command. Emergency grants of £2 and up to £10 paid. Larger sums and anomalies were decisions central made. An idea was put forward that a statutory sum be given to wrens serving as they became a mum. It didn't gain much headway. The Grants Committee said, "Distress and true necessity is how this trust is led." Cases in the early years reflected women's lives. Poverty and pregnancy, a struggle to survive. Confinement fees, rising debt to manage on their own. No husband and no income, unwanted and alone. At last the war was over, service women left in droves. Some of them were given grants to purchase civvy clothes. The needs of wrens were changing. No time left to shirk. To get the country moving, these ladies needed work. The working party's challenge to find which way to go. The answer was to set up an employment advice bureau. This would help with placement, but retraining the new need would require much greater funding, they very soon agreed. The training and business subgroup studied every ask, deciding if the payment would satisfy the task. Giving grants for stock or fittings, training courses too. One lady a piano for a private ballet school. Dame Vera thought in 46 the time had surely come to affiliate the Asse Wrens, and this was duly done. Next business was a charter to gain the royal seal. Conferred in 1950, they finally felt real. A suggestion to consider was, should they grant a loan? Many ladies wanted to buy and have a home. After much discussion, they agreed and named a sum, the house price of £3,000, the noted maximum. The Wrens in 1950 finally became an official part of the Navy and recognised by name. They could perform at royal tournaments and actually have a say. What really might have helped them then was a bit of equal pay. One lady in the 50s had a dual request. New false teeth and a bicycle would help her working quest. Full sum for teeth was granted and a new bike would be nice, but second hand would do the job at less than half the price. Although case numbers lessened, expenditure still grew, ladies needing aid once more to help them make it through. The rising cost of living was having an effect. A hand-to-mouth existence is what some could expect. The advent of the 60s saw social change ahead. Women's liberation is what the paper said. Wages spiralling downward, inflation on the rise, Brit-in and decimalisation, big issues, no surprise. Numbers now declining and Central were concerned. They felt the need to spread the word, leave no stone unturned. They campaigned quite tirelessly to make ex-Wrens aware. Donation came from serving girls and proved the young do care, and many of us were those young. In the early 70s, the Trust had a big review to find the cost-effectiveness of what they had to do. Command committees folded, loans were duly scrapped. First stage unit officers is how the route was mapped. Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, in 1974, became the Trust's new president, an asset and much more. It helped to raise the profile, and word quite quickly spread. There was a trust to aid them should trouble lie ahead. Central, always mindful of how trust funds were raised, the efforts people went to were always thanked and praised. So after much discussion, all voted and agreed a new-fangled computer would fulfil the GSEC's need. Case numbers in the 90s once again began to soar. Many in their 90s who'd served in the First World War. Walking sticks, Zimmer frames, a stair lift or wheelchair. Maintenance grants for those in debt were also very much there. When Her Majesty the Queen Mother sadly passed away, the Princess Royal became our patron and still is to this day. She's only our second patron, and we thank her now as then for her continued support and attendance at every AGM. In 2010, the trustees commissioned an actuarial review to help access the future needs to see the journey through. It predicted falling numbers and the capital required to fund remaining cases with what might be desired. The Grants Committee meetings are now held less frequently. Every trustee must attend at least once annually. They paint a vivid picture of the lives some ladies lead, how desperate some girls find themselves, or simple is their need. One required a weekly grant to help care for her son. A rating needed funding to bury her dear mum. A grant for a new wet room helps a lady stay at home. And a carer for a sweet ex-chief makes her feel less alone. One lady can chew toffees now she has new teeth. An ex-rem was acquitted as we helped to fund her brief. Another's motor scooter lets her whiz around the town. A vision with new spectacles has lost her squinting frown. Make a difference is a phrase we have come to know, and ex-rems doing many things have helped trust funds to grow. Coffee mornings, races now, round coastal paths one strode. Dinners, auctions, sponsored rides, one even wrote an ode. With 80 years of benevolence, I'm sure you will agree, the difference that's made by the Trust is very plain to see. Decisions for the future will be made with utmost care to ensure for the last Wren standing, the Wren's BT is there. Thank you. Just a note to say that Britain refers to Britain joining the common market, and no snails were harmed during the snail racing.
Ollie is artiste in residence, so to speak, and I thank her on behalf of all the members and guests today for that terrific and very, very entertaining ode, which I know has taken you a huge amount of research and time to put together. For those interested in hearing it again, a film of today's meeting will be made available on the Trust's website in due course, and copies can be furnished by Sarah in the BT office on request. Your Royal Highness, may I now invite you to address our honoured guests and members.
Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I kind of feel redundant after that. Jiggle covered everything I was going to say. Much more instead. But there you go, never mind. But last year's AGM was nearly physical. Some of us were allowed in, but it was very limited. It's really nice to be able to come back to this occasion and to see so many of you here, because it is to celebrate the 80th anniversary AGM of the Trust. So it's very nice that we can all do that, and I hope that all of you will have a copy of the ode, because that is a pretty good history of the Trust. Thank you so much for doing that. Going back to the start is always a good idea, and of course our director, David Vera Lawton-Matthews, did have the foresight to realise that a benevolent trust would be needed at the outbreak of the Second World War. And it did, although she lived through that gnawing period between the First and the Second World War, when everybody forgot about people like Wrens, and although I discovered the other day that the same was true of the Intelligence Corps, nobody thought they needed them between the wars. I didn't do that again, fortunately. Neither did they stop the Wrens after that. And of course, the Trust meeting was held at Westfield College, which used to be part of London University, which was the main female college, London University, and now sadly no longer part of it. It's been absorbed, but it was attended by that over 100 members, which I think is an extraordinary turnout, given what was going on at the time. 4 dames, which is not a bad turnout equally at that stage of the Wren's career. And of course, my grandmother was the patron, and my aunt, Princess Marina, my great-aunt, Princess Marina, was elected president, who I have to say looked as elegant as anybody ever has done in a uniform, to which we all aspire but never really succeed. Reviewing the Trust's records is an interesting one, because that list of things, the needs have not changed drastically over 80 years. There are still grants to help ladies in poor health, the purchase of medical aids and help with household repairs, supporting education and training opportunities to re-enter employment. I'm sorry that the smile comes with the medical aids, because when you mentioned teeth, fortunately it wasn't a lady, but I occasionally do the march past after the cenotaph. And if you've heard this, stop me. Because it was a naval unit went past of veterans. And I didn't notice at the time, but somebody else did, my policeman noticed. But the chap who went eyes right, and I was busy saluting, so I hadn't noticed. But he said it quite forcefully. And I was vaguely aware of somebody coming out to my left and picking something up. At the end of the parade, when I went back to the car, this chap in naval uniform came over to my policeman, big smile, because actually he had in his hand, wrapped in his teeth, which had left, because he said eyes right with such enthusiasm. What I failed to spot, because he was a bit further on by then, was how on earth he ever managed to get eyes front. Out at all. Anyway, that was a distraction. I'm sorry you did that. I'm carrying on because there are many more important things to talk about. But there you go. And one of them, and ridiculously, because things don't change, is fuel poverty, which has been a constant theme throughout the Trust's time. They've already made significant grants in the 50s, the 70s, and the 80s. And that was paying for coal and utility bills. And I'm sorry to say that that will be, if it isn't already, will remain an issue for the future. And I think that all of them in the Trust will be pleased to know that we've already taken steps to help prevent that fuel data actually happening and quickly deal with those applications for support. And I think one of the advantages about the scale of the Trust is that it can respond so quickly to those demands. Bit of perspective that we haven't heard is that in 80 years, the Trust has spent just over £8 million and supported 12,500 members and their families. Because we hear about them, don't we, as odd individuals at the end of a year. This is quite an impressive figure to contemplate. And it's an amazing achievement for which I think all the patrons, presidents, trustees, and members should be rightly proud. And this is a moment where we can put those numbers together so you can look back and see just what has been achieved and just think of the gap that could have been there if the Trust hadn't existed. But in the present, in 2021, we've already spent the 170,000 in delivery of its financial objectives. You will, of course, have noticed that in the annual report, and it will be covered by your Chairman and Treasurer. And what is equally encouraging is that legacies have continued to arrive, and for the future that will be a really important part of our financing. 121,000 plus has been donated and a further 98,000 to come. And honestly, the generosity of these ladies, usually, and their legacies is so important, and they perhaps partly because they really do recognise the difference it can make. And it underlines those very special bonds forged by service life that leads them to remember their former colleagues in this way. Now, of course, fundraising activities as such, we didn't see much of in the last 2 years, although you found some pretty imaginative ways around with that particular issue. But fundraising activities are also advertising the Trust so that more people are aware of it. So yes, it's about money, but it's also about reminding people that the Trust is actually there for them. And looking to the future, as we've heard, delivering its objectives into the future until the very last eligible beneficiary. And that could be another 40 or 50 years. So that decision that the care should be exercised to ensure that whatever arrangements are made for the future, all those eligible for support will always be supported. So the voting on the options by the trustees is scheduled to take place very soon, and that is important that everybody is aware of that and makes note of it. And that decision reached will be communicated and voted on by members at an extraordinary general meeting. The Trust is, of course, preparing and for a possibly very busy year again, as that cost of living continues to rise. But the Trust remains wholly as relevant and responsive as ever since its inception in 1942, and is prepared to deal with whatever the coming months may bring. But it also underlines the foresight of our founders in creating the Trust in the first place and understanding the value of what it could do. So thank you all for your continued unwavering support and engagement, because it's that which enables the Trust to continue to meet its objectives. Thank you.
Your Royal Highness, we are most grateful for the close interest that you have always taken in the Wren's Benevolent Trust and for your kind words today. Although you first engaged with the Trust as President in 1974, 2022 marks the 20th year that you have been our patron. To express our grateful thanks for your patronage, I would like at this point, on behalf of the Vice Presidents, Trustees and staff of the Trust, to present you with a gift. This is in the form of a donation of £600 to Her Majesty the Queen's Green Canopy Initiative in this her Platinum Jubilee year. The scroll, ma'am, which I would now like to present to you, details the gift.
Oh, very kind. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Stipulate tree oaks for building ships. No, no.
Before we go any further, I'd just like to introduce the other people on the platform today. To my right is Captain Catherine Jordan, Royal Navy, our Vice Chairman, and to my left, Sarah Ayton, our General Secretary, and Maggie Boland, our Trustee and our Treasurer. Now, the minutes of the 79th Annual General Meeting have been circulated by email. Before we vote on their adoption, may I remind you that only those who served in the WRNS, including those Wrens who went on to serve in the Royal Navy, are entitled to vote. Is it the wish of this meeting that the minutes be adopted? May I have a show of hands? Are there any against? Thank you. I will now take the usual course of going through our annual report for 2021, picking out points of note, and beginning on page 5 with the risks. I don't intend to reiterate what is written there, but suffice to say, the Trust continues to take risk management very seriously, as unprecedented world events continue to have an impact on our business. At the last AGM, I alluded to the fact that due to the pandemic, various workarounds had to be adopted or developed to permit caseworking to continue in support of our beneficiaries. Today, I am pleased to report that caseworking is largely back to normal in terms of process, and those workarounds that have proved successful have sensibly been retained. The Grants Committee now meet in person, only resorting to hybrid meetings when necessary, and home visits by caseworkers, which are often vital to try and assess an individual's full range of needs, are taking place, while still observing any COVID protocols that those involved wish to observe or practice. Moving on to page 6 and the grants. Including those whose regular grants ceased during 2021 and for whom renewal applications were not required, the Trust assisted 137 beneficiaries with one-off or regular grants. This number represented a one-third drop-off from 184 in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. A reduction in numbers would be expected due to the decreasing size of the Wrens population, and they are in line with our most recent report from the actuary. Due to the loss of several regular beneficiaries and our inability to complete on some larger complex one-off cases requiring input by local authorities, the total value of grants came in short of the original budget of £290,000 at £170,000. Like many other military charities, we failed to experience any upturn in applications because of the pandemic, although we anticipate that the increase in the general cost of living and the soaring costs of energy are now tipping many ladies into difficulties. The level of all our regular grants, which are listed on pages 6 and 7, still compares favourably with those provided by similar charities and are subject to annual review. The flexibility of the weekly support supplement, which may also be used as a temporary measure where an individual's circumstances are expected to improve, remains particularly effective. Similarly, the one-off general amenity grant continues to provide a useful tool, with the number of regular recipients remaining steady. Setting regular grants aside, for the first time in recent years, the next highest area of expenditure of £13,049 was on household repairs, reflecting the low number of applications for mobility aids and disability adaptations due to the effects of the pandemic. There are some excellent and sobering examples on pages 9 to 11 of how some relatively small sums awarded made a huge difference to the lives of our beneficiaries and their families. At this point, I'd just like to mention one lady we have been assisting for the first time over the last 10 months. She is a 70-year-old former Wren and Royal Navy widow, whose husband served also in the Merchant Navy and died unexpectedly in 2010, aged 62 years. This lady suffers from a group of blood cancers which greatly affect her immune system, and she undergoes fortnightly blood transfusions. Much weakened and subject to falls, she suffers from extreme lethargy and is wheelchair-bound. The local authority has a domiciliary care package in place, with the client required to make a significant contribution towards this. SAFA presented an excellent case for assistance towards an anticipated personal contribution of £5,500 that this lady was required to make towards a local authority disabled facilities grant, enabling the installation of a through-floor lift within her modest property, a stair lift not meeting health and safety requirements. With our NBT also approached, we encouraged additional submission to the Royal British Legion and asked SAFA to make tentative inquiries to the Merchant Navy charities. In August of last year, the Trust quietly earmarked a maximum grant of up to £4,000 to assist with this cost, immediately offering £2,500 from this as a starting point. The Royal British Legion subsequently provided £2,000 and the RMBT £1,000. And subsequently, the Merchant Navy's Nautilus Welfare Fund provided a contribution of £500, reducing the Wren's BT share to a cost of £2,000. Our Grants Committee also noted this lady's personal commitment to clear an array of debts within the next 12 months. Now, while we could not help with these, the committee agreed to award an exceptional and temporary care enhancement grant of £50 per week for 12 months to help her meet her care needs, with most of this funded by the remaining balance of our maximum grant. While this award would only allow her regular income and expenditure to just about balance each week, the RMBT in parallel awarded this RM widow a regular charitable payment then of £33 per week. I think you will agree that this demonstrates how well harmonisation of costs can be achieved, with charities working together to both share funding and jointly provide assistance in this very deserving case. For information and reassurance, in all cases of debts and arrears, applicants are referred for debt management action to bodies such as the Seafarers Advice and Information Line, Step Change and the Citizens Advice Bureau, who expertly support the often complex needs of applicants. The Trust has not increased the maximum one-off grant of £4,000 since 2016. 2 maximum grants were awarded during 2021, neither of which was used in full, against 3 in 2020, In each case, we successfully harmonised with other charities and therefore effectively shared the cost. A point I'd like to draw your attention to is the expenditure on education grants, where having increased significantly in 2020 compared to 2019, it reduced again in 2021, therefore remaining low historically. Our Royal Charter allows for those wishing to retrain in order to better able to support themselves and their families. And therefore we continue to welcome new applications and have increased communication of this fact to members via the Wren magazine, presentations to groups of Wrens, our social media and other means. The number of applicants approaching the Trust for the first time numbered only 18, a decrease against 40 in 2020. Returning applicants seeking one-off grants numbered 24, a decrease from 39 in 2020. The graph on page 8 of the report depicts the age breakdown of those we have helped over the past 4 years. You will see that the number of ladies in their 80s and 90s has, not surprisingly, reduced by a third in the last 4 years, whereas the number of younger women requiring our assistance has remained steady over the last couple of years. It is likely that while many of these will continue to require a helping hand, your trustees remain confident that the Trust's strategic plan, which is based on the 2019 refreshed actuarial review, is well founded. As always, we are grateful for the support provided by SAFA in particular, the Royal British Legion and the Royal Commonwealth Ex-Services League in identifying potential applicants and beneficiaries. The casework provided by these organisations can be quite complex, especially regarding our younger applicants. Our grants administrator, Roger Collins, undertakes significant background research to ensure that your grants committee have all the information they need to make the right decisions. The reduction in cases received now allows much more time and care to be spent on current and individual wider needs. As previously mentioned, the Trust works very closely alongside other charities, sharing outreach opportunities. We are also most grateful for the support of all those individuals and organisations mentioned on pages 13 to 14 of the report. We are enormously appreciative of those who remember the Trust in their wills, and the details in the most generous legacies and in memoriam donations received during 2021 are provided at pages 14 and 15. Our Treasurer will provide further details of our legacy income in her report. The Trust, as ever, remains extremely grateful to the members of the Association of Wrens and Women of the Royal Naval Services for all that they do on our behalf. Details of the totals raised specifically for the Trust by the Association's branches and their informal groups are provided on page 16 of the report. I would also like to express our sincere thanks today to Mr. George Copley. He's in the audience today as one of our honoured guests. George's mother, Elizabeth Copley, was a former World War II Wren, and in his year as president of the Porters Park Golf Club, and in memory of his mother, he decided that his chosen charities for his fundraising activities would be the Wrens BT and OUCH, which is the Organisation for the Understanding of Cluster Headaches. He and his members were delayed by the pandemic, but have raised a grand total of £10,000 for the Trust, which is a fantastic achievement. George, I think your mother would be delighted by this fact, and I thank you and your members for thinking of us and their amazing generosity. The funds will be put to very good use, and I do hope you enjoy our day with us today. And as ever, huge thanks are also due to all our trustees, the members of the Central, Grants, Finance and Quality Assurance Committees, our Strategic Direction Working Group, our ambassadors, our General Secretary and Assistant Secretary, and all those willing volunteers who support us throughout the year. I shall now call upon Maggie Boland to present the balance sheet and statement of accounts.
Your Royal Highness, Vice President, Trust officials, honoured guests and members. The 2021 financial year once again saw good results for the Trust. The statement of financial activities on page 23 of the annual report shows a net income of £331,000, including investment gains. By way of comparison, net income in 2020 was £59,000, also including investment gains. Disregarding those investment gains, net expenditure was £34,000, whilst net expenditure in 2020 was £9,000. With income from investments being the only constant source of funds, any shortfall is met largely due to the generous legacies from those ladies who thought to remember us in their will, together with the many kind donations from our patron, supporters and keen fundraisers. I shall make further reference to legacies and donations in the detail of my report. Some insights into what drives the results. The value of our trust investment portfolio increased to 4.228 million from 3.9 million in 2020. And against a forecast budget of 290,000, grants awarded were 170,000, down from the 220,000 in 2020. This equates to a decrease of 22%. It's a trend we have seen for the last 3 years. Apart from a tiny blip in 2019, money spent has been dropping since 2007. Donations, legacies and investment income provided us with 260,000 in total, down from the 322,000 in 2020. In short, the financial results have a way of reflecting the wider influences of what's happening globally, with global markets settling and individuals reconciling life after lockdown. Turning to some of the details. Income from legacies provided 121,000, with 2 receipts exceeding 10,000. The largest being a very generous 82,000 from a Mrs. Kerry Stone, who sadly we know very little about, and a Mrs. Mary Summers, who bequeathed 15,000 from her estate. We've been notified of a further legacies totaling 98,000 that don't yet meet the accounting rules to be included in our 2021 results. But it does show that we already have a large pipeline of legacies to work through this year. While slightly down on budget, In Memoriam provided £3,483 and individual donations were up at 10,234. Sales of the Association's Christmas cards, funds from collection boxes and fundraising activities ensured they all outperformed against their budgets and gave us a total of 8,131. I would like to take this opportunity to give special mention to some of our key contributors this past year. £2,000 from Ollie Butler for sales of her marvellous St. Rennial Odes. And a further £300 from the Communications Wrens Summer Lunch. We received £688 from Nick Carter, HMS Collingwood, for his ongoing cap tally tying efforts. £370 from the Wrens BT cake sale at HMS Collingwood. £1,200 surplus from the December 2021 fundraising dinner. And £150 from a current beneficiary for her stunning artwork and calendar sales. We very much want to give heartfelt thanks to them all. Now if I turn to expenditure. As already highlighted, we awarded grants of 170,000 during the year. For completeness, the actuary's review carried out in 2019 projected we would need £248,000 to support grant funding. However, we can't overlook the challenges that COVID has presented us with elderly and vulnerable people shielding and with caseworkers, local authority teams and the Trust's own staff all having to work from home. Casework was, as you might expect, affected. We did, however, implement various means of workarounds for most of those cases affected. The administration and the daily running of the Trust is managed very well by our 2 staff members, Sarah and Roger. Their combined experience and oversight mean we were in a very tight ship and generally to budget. Last year, we underspent the general expenditure budget by just short of £2,000. For interest, notable line items are investment managers' fees, which were higher than budget as a direct consequence of the increasing value of the Trust's portfolio, On the other hand, professional fees set aside to engage with our lawyers when required were thankfully lower than budget. Fundraising and publicity costs rose slightly, principally due to more support costs being allocated to raising funds. Other costs were either slightly under or just over budget, mainly due to the timing of bills and expenses being less than expected, as meetings continue to be attended by Zoom and or face-to-face where possible. And whilst we did not make any substantial capital purchases during the year, we finally did purchase long overdue office chairs for Sarah and Roger. To round up the financials, I'll now turn to the Trust portfolio of investments and cash on deposit. Global markets continued to rally in 2021, such that we received £116,213 in investment income against a target of £110,000. The value of the portfolio increased by £325,000 to £4.228 million at year end. The cash at the bank as of the 31st of December was £528,426 in total, with £450,485 in bank accounts and just short of £78,000 on deposit with Brewin Dolphin. Overall, the Trust closed the year with a balance sheet figure of £4.8 million compared to £4.5 million in 2020. With a balanced risk portfolio and a healthy amount of cash, the Trust does not intend to request any major grants in 2022. If there were a shortfall in the year, we will continue to draw down on our investment portfolio in accordance with the strategic plan. To that end, we remain a viable Trust with a solid financial base able to continue to provide for our beneficiaries, as we have done since April 1942, when we assisted just 39 Wrens in our first 9 months, and we spent £185, which in today's money equates to just under £5,000. By 1949, the numbers assisted had jumped to 1,087, with a spend of £13,819, now worth £367,000 in today's money. With the ongoing oversight from our governors and trustees, together with a prudent and cautious investment policy, we have continued to provide for our beneficiaries over the years to the present day. And finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Miranda Thompson-Schwab, who sadly isn't here with us today. She has supported the Trust as our investment manager for a number of years, and we wish her a long and happy and well-deserved retirement. But we welcome her replacement, Chris Nolt, who's with us today as our new investment manager. Welcome, Chris. And finally, heartfelt thanks to our auditors, Gibson Witter and Gavin Witter, and his client manager, Carla Venables, for their advice and ongoing support. This ends my report. Thank you.
The trustees have agreed the annual objectives for the Trust for 2022, and they are to satisfy from its own resources or in conjunction with other charities the needs of applicants assessed as requiring a grant subject to grants policy, to review all regular grants on an ongoing basis, to review the Trust performance against the output of the refreshed actuarial review and plan the strategic direction of the Trust, to further develop the Trust relationship with other Royal Naval charities, and to be prepared for a possible increase in applications for support once the true impact of the global pandemic and the increase in fuel prices on the economy is known. I now invite Mrs Ollie Butler, trustee, to propose adoption of the annual report, balance sheet and statement of accounts for the year ended 31st of December 2021.
Mrs Ollie Butler. Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I propose that the 79th annual report, together with the balance sheet and statement of accounts for the year ending 31st of December 2021, be adopted and so.
And Mrs Alison Gott, trustee, to second the resolution.
Mrs Alison Gott, trustee. Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I second this proposal.
May I now have a show of hands of all in favour? Are there any against? Thank you, that's carried. The nominations for election have been circulated and members are now asked to approve the list of those nominated for office in 2022 to 2023. There is one new nomination for trustee, as just one of our trustees have come to the end of their 7-year tenure. This is Mrs. Ollie Butler, who earlier presented the ode. Ollie, we thank you for your commitment and significant contribution to the Trust, for organising the annual Wren Communicator lunches, and of course your delightful odes, which have kept us entertained and raised so much in the way of donations. Ollie, we wish you all the best for the future. Thank you. Chief Petty Officer Jenny Rowe has put herself forward to take on the role of trustee, and you will see from her biography on the reverse of your election sheets, she will bring both new and unique skills to the Board of Trustees. Commander Liz Walmsley, past trustee and honorary treasurer, is now welcomed as a nominee for a role as a vice president. The Central Committee unanimously supports all these nominations. I will now invite Mrs. Euphemia Yates, trustee, to propose that the nominations for the Central Committee and our Vice President be adopted.
Euphemia Yates, trustee, that I, Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I propose that the nomination for the role of Vice President and the Central Committee be adopted.
And Mrs. Jeanette Christ to second the resolution.
This is Jeanette Christ, trustee. Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I second this proposal.
May I now have a show of hands of all in favour? Are there any against? Thank you, that motion is now carried. We now come to the reappointment of our auditors. Gavin Witter from Gibson Witter is present today, and the Central Committee are very pleased with all the support he and his team have provided to the Trust. And I now call upon Chief Petty Officer Sandra Parkinson, trustee, to propose the motion for the reappointment of auditors.
Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I propose that Gibson Witter, nominated by the Central Committee, to be appointed as auditors to the Trust for the current year.
And I invite Chief Petty Officer Aurora Allen, serving representative, to second the motion.
Chief Petty Officer Aurora Allen, Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I second this proposal.
All those in favour? Are there any against? Thank you. That motion is carried, and that concludes the formal voting, so thank you. We now come to items 9 and 10 on our agenda and our guest speakers for today. As you will be only too aware, 2022 also marks the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War. A fact we wish to pay due respect to, and not least because there are several members of the audience today, both male and female, who were serving at that time. One of those is Mr. Charlie Threlfall, who will address us today on his experiences in 1982 on board HMS Broadsword. Charlie joined the Royal Navy in 1980, aged 17, meaning that he was just 19 when he went to the South Atlantic. He left the Royal Navy in 1986, having completed a short service commission. 6 weeks after leaving, he joined the Hampshire Police, completing 30 years service as a firearms specialist and close protection officer. He is currently on the police staff, coordinating royal and ministerial visits. Continuing the Falklands theme, our second guest speaker today is Mrs. Anne New. Anne joined the Wrens in 1972 as an education assistant, leaving as a warrant officer in the Education and Training Support Branch in 1994. Anne was an assistant to the controller of the Casualty Action Cell based in HMS Nelson in support of those serving during the Falklands War. For her contribution, Anne was awarded the British Empire Medal, one of only 4 Wrens to be listed on the Falklands Honours List, a fact which she is justly very proud of. Charlie, Anne, we are very privileged to have both of you with us today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank goodness the IT works, and so does the microphone. Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this started as a conversation between Sarah and I'm so pleased to be here today speaking to you. I've got half an hour, and so I've got to get on with it. As you can see, I'm a member of the Bomb Alley Survivors Club. There's quite a few thousand of us, but I'm very proud to be a member of the Bomb Alley Survivors Club. You'll notice I have some notes. They are in massive print because my eyesight's going now. So I will refer to them now and again, but most of it is all up here. Oh, it works. I was young once. That's me at 18 at the end of 1981 when I'd done my first year at Dartmouth. That's me as a salty sub-lieutenant back in the Falklands over Christmas 84-85 in HMS Berwick on a patrol. And that's just before I came out, just got my second stripe. I left the Navy to join the police. My mother, 90, still refers to this as my proper job. In my second year as a midshipman, I joined the fleet. I joined HMS Ledbury, then very new. She is now the oldest operational ship in the fleet. And then I got a pierhead jump. For any non-naval types in the room, that's a move at short notice to HMS Broadsword. She was very new then. She was commissioned in 79, the lead ship of the Type 22s. General purpose stroke anti-submarine. You'll notice she's missing a Vickers 4.5-inch Mark 8 gun on her bow. That's one of the lessons we learnt in the Falklands War. She was all missile armament. We had 4 Exocets. Oh, work. Yeah, there we go. There are those launchers there. And we had Seawolf fore and aft as well. Seawolf was a very, very advanced point defence missile system, probably the best point defence missile system at sea at that time in 1982. We also had the most experienced captain afloat, Captain Bill Canning, DSO. And that's what you really need. You can have the newest ship, you can have all the kit you like, but you've got to have an experienced captain, and we had that. And as I'll go on to explain, that's why we were selected for the role that we were given. We were at Gibraltar on exercise Spring Train 82 when the Falklands were invaded, and that was quite fortuitous because we had a large number of frigates and destroyers at Gibraltar ready to go. So the carrier battle group sailed from UK, Hermes and Invincible. We RV'd off the Azores and we all met up with everybody else at Ascension Island. There was a slight pause at Ascension Island. The amphibious landing ships had left UK so quick that some of the kit you'd need to get onto the beach was at the stern of the ship when it should have been at the front. So there was a bit of a reset for a couple of days, and then we set off down south. So we're now on a war footing. We've gone from peacetime Navy to wartime Navy very quickly indeed. But what happens then? Well, when you're in at Gibraltar next to a ship that's not going to the Falklands, you steal every machine gun they've got, every box of ammunition, as much canned food, anything. And obviously we landed stuff that we didn't need. And then as we set off from Ascension, we didn't transmit on any radars. We didn't show any lights at night. We were in a 20-plus ship task group. I was training to be a watchkeeping officer on the bridge. For all those of you who have done that job, I'll just say that again. No radar, no lights at night. Just that fact alone, to get all of that moving south, was quite a feat. Hermes was the only ship to burn one very dim masthead light, and we all had to station keep around that light. Now, HMS Hermes. We were made Hermes goalkeeper. Why was that? Well, Hermes was quite old then, and she had very poor defensive armament. And the goalkeeping principle was invented. So what's the goalkeeper do? The goalkeeper stops the ball from going in the net. Everyone knows that. So the goal is HMS Hermes. We're the goalkeeper. Unfortunately, the ball is a bomb, an aircraft, or a missile. And we had to be up threat at all times on that carrier. Forgot to show you Ascension Island. There it is. That's what I meant to show you. So that was our primary role to start with as we headed south, was to goalkeep on Hermes. If we couldn't shoot whatever it was down with our Seawolf system, then the idea was it'd hit us and not Hermes. Far better, when you're Admiral Sandy Woodward, to lose an escort frigate than lose one of your carriers. If you'd lost one of your carriers, no invasion of the Falklands. So it wasn't the best of jobs, let's put it like that. And we had to practice how to do that. This has just been invented. So that's what we're doing here. This is Hermes. And look at all those munitions on deck. This is wartime Navy. You wouldn't see that in peacetime. We actually had, on the main deck, one deck down within the ship, we had 5 Seawolf missiles in boxes lined up on that deck, because that's what we took in from the other ship as well. They had some spares. You'd never see that in peacetime. Munitions are kept in sprinkler-controlled, temperature-controlled, anti-static magazines. They're not kept on 2-deck with people sitting on them with a cup of tea having a chat. Wartime Navy. So what have we just done here? That's our wake. We've just passed right underneath the bow of the carrier. If you did that in peacetime as a captain, I should imagine the Admiral will be having words with you, and you'd probably lose your command for endangering your ship. We had to practice that. We had to manoeuvre around that carrier the quickest way possible and be up threat at all times. So that's what we did. We were a very fast ship, very fast. Controllable pitch propellers, Olympus gas turbine engines. If you'd wanted to, she was fast enough from a standing start to get up on water skis behind her. We didn't do a lot of water skiing during the Falklands War. She would stop from 30 knots in 2 ship lengths. She would have probably shaken herself to pieces, but she'd have done it. So we were a very, very quick, well-armed ship with a good captain. So off we went. This is us taken from Hermes. It's not high threat there because we're not close enough. This is the first picture that came back to UK that was printed in the newspapers. There's Hermes, there's us. That is high threat positioning. Can you imagine going around the bow of that ship? You've only got to have a steering gear failure, an engine breakdown, a gyro failure, and 23,500 tons of carrier is going to roll right over you. So it was a pretty dangerous job. We haven't even started fighting anyone yet. We thought we'd better test our Seawolf missile system on the way down. So we loaded one up. We got a friendly frigate to fire a 4.5-inch shell over the top of the ship. For all you serving, that's a Crichton turret. We didn't have them back then, but I couldn't find an old picture. And then with the analog computer that was the brain of Seawolf, conceived and built in the 60s and 70s, within about 2 or 3 seconds, it spotted that shell. It's indicated to the system, and it shot it down. So we're happy with that. If we can shoot down a 4.5 shell, may even be able to hit an Exocet, who knows? Remember that picture of Ascension Island? Well, guess what? We're now heading south, and it got rougher and rougher. I'll just take you back to that one. We're quite a long way away there because it's rough. The Argentinians couldn't fly in bad weather, and they couldn't fly at night. Or they couldn't or didn't. So we quite like the rough weather because it meant we were a little bit safer. You can see in the grey distance there, my pointer's not working very well on this, is it? But in the distance, there we go, That's Invincible, and HMS Brilliant, who was her goalkeeper, won't be far away. So we like rough weather. Well, we didn't like rough weather, but we like rough weather. And we got very, very used to taking, well, it wasn't really blue waves over the bow, it was sort of grey really, but we took an absolute pounding, as all the ships did in that environment. And that's taken from our bridge. So, just to operate in that environment, I've told you about the radars and the no lights and everything. In weather like that, you're constantly doing this to stay upright, constantly. All your waking hours, you're doing this, and it's really tiring. You're using your leg muscles all the time. I was the third midshipman to join Broadsword. The midshipman's grot was a 2-berth cabin. Oh dear. My pit was a camp bed in an electrical compartment nearby with a big, hot, buzzing piece of electrical equipment. I didn't know what it did. I don't know what it does to this day. But I do know it had rounds done it on it every hour. So on the rare occasion I was in my pit, a sailor, oh, sorry, sir, every hour, on the hour. We were in defence watches. When we left Ascension, we were in defence watches, 6 hours on, 6 hours off, for 69 days. That's quite a long time. That's nearly 10 weeks of 6 hours on, 6 hours off. Not too much sleep, going like this. We haven't even fought anyone yet. So it was a hard environment to operate in, I think is what I'm trying to say to you. Is there anything else on my massive notes? Let's have a look. Oh, food. Oh. Don't get me wrong, naval chefs, best in the world. But after 2 or 3 weeks, all your fresh foods run out. You're on frozen, you're on tinned. I can't look at, Sarah knows what's coming, a tin of boiled new potatoes to this day. I can't. I'd never eat one again because pot mess. Action messing, when you're at action stations, the chefs come up with a hot meal. How do they do that? They come up with action snacks, bacon butties all wrapped in foil. How do they do that when we're, I'll tell you later what was happening to us. But they did. They were absolutely superb. On the 1st of May, we declared the TES, a total exclusion zone. And that basically said to Argentina, if you've got your armed forces within 200 miles of Port Stanley, we are going to attack you, so get off our islands. They didn't get off our islands. On the way down, it was all very gung-ho, as you can imagine. And I certainly felt that when the Argentinians realised the Royal Navy were coming down in a big task force, they would have left. That's what we honestly believed, but they didn't. We struck first, 2nd of May, HMS Conqueror torpedoed Belgrano. There's lots of stuff been talked about that. She was a World War II cruiser. Our Exocets would have bounced off her armour plate. She was a deadly threat to the task force, and the decision made was to take her out, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. Unfortunately, on the 4th of May, this happened. This is HMS Sheffield. She was hit by an Exocet missile. For many years, they said it didn't explode and it was the unburnt fuel that set her alight. The thinking now is that it probably did explode inside her. When an Exocet's in its terminal phase, it looks at the length of the ship, the height of the ship, it picks the centre and in it goes. And in a Type 42, that's the galley. And that's why so many of the caterers and chefs were killed. One of whom was somebody who was my neighbour at home, who I went to school with, and was 18. So that really brought it home to me when I saw his name on a casualty signal a couple of days later, what we were actually dealing with here. We were about 30 miles away from Sheffield when she was sunk. That's a little clip out of the Isle of Wight County Press, a fine publication. So there are 4 of us from my little road in Bembridge on the Isle of Wight, and we were all in the task force. One guy was 26, he was a Harrier pilot, we didn't really know him, but the other 3 of us, we'd been to school together, we were neighbours, and we joined the Navy about the same time. They joined the lower deck, I joined as an officer. And Andrew Swallow was the name of the chef that was killed. His nickname was Titch. And unfortunately, as I've just said, Titch died on the 4th of May. We'll fast forward now to 21st of May because time is pressing. D-Day. Now, this map is of its time. This map appeared in the little books publication that the ship produced afterwards. As you can see, it's hand-drawn, but it's of its time, and that's why I don't put a fancy map in here. We're taking you back 40 years, so there it is. So the task force was sort of being held out here. The carrier's about 200 miles to the east of the islands for most of it. And on the night, 21st of May, we and other ships led the amphibious ships into San Carlos water, just to the right and down a bit of where the arrow's showing. So this is a sort of better picture. We've come in here. This is Falkland Sound, and in the circle are all the amphibious landing ships. And we, the 7 escorts, with the blue boxes round, and us in particular by the arrow there, we are going to soak up the air attacks on the first day, because we want them to attack us, leave the amphibious ships alone, to let them disgorge troops and equipment at the bridgehead. So that was the plan. Little bit more detail. Our patrol line was, this isn't working too well at all, is it? Our patrol line was here, only about 3 miles long. Look how close the land is. Type 22s were designed for warfare in the North Atlantic at sea, not to be half a mile off the shore. Aircraft could pop up and be on you before you could do anything about it. So all was going very well. We went to action stations before sunrise. So that means everybody is doing something. Me, I was in the Forward Damage Control Party, 2 decks down. And it was going very well. The sun came up at 9 o'clock. The fighting day was going to be 8 hours long, because that was only the amount of daylight there was. And at 9:30, oh dear, we got spotted by the Argentinian Air Force. Right, if I say Thursday War, there's going to be some wry smiles. I can see them everywhere. I remember the Thursday War at Portland. Now it's at Devonport, I understand, in the modern Navy. 4 or 5 hours on a Thursday morning, you were probably subjected to, I don't know, 4 or 5 air attacks in that time? Yeah, let's go for that. We had 35 air attacks in 8 hours. Live, real, deadly air attacks in 8 hours. We managed to shoot one down with our Seawolf missiles. They were basically coming from the direction, coming from the west, from the direction of Argentina, because they were land-based aircraft. And on that first day, that's the majority of the attacks came in that way. So we were strafed, shot at using 20 and 30 millimeter airborne cannon, and we were bombed on many occasions. We didn't actually get hit that day. We were near missed on many occasions. And sometimes we were straddled by 2 bombs, and that means one goes to one side of the ship, it goes to the other, and they both explode, and that basically lifts the whole hull of the ship up, which when you're below decks, I can tell you, is not very nice. It's not very nice if you're on the upper deck, but it's not very nice below decks. So, when all else fails, get a Royal Marine, give them a GPMG, and loads of ammunition. Nothing goes wrong with that. There's a couple of our booties from our ship's detachment. Basically, that's been welded onto the handrail on the way down because what we didn't have were large numbers of rapid-fire weapons like you have in the Navy you have today. That's one of our World War II vintage 40mm Bofors guns. They're claiming a hit. Look how close the land is. That was the environment we were operating in. So aircraft would just appear over that hill and attack us. Seawolf wasn't that good to be able to lock on quick enough. The only reason we shot that other one down is that it came across the sea from West Falkland, and we got lucky on a hit there. This very obligingly was supplied by the Argentinian Air Force. This is them shooting at us. There's 2 aircraft there. The first guy, probably a bit more experienced. I'd say he's put about 10 rounds in the water, and then he's completely drilled us around the funnel area. And this guy, more junior, and he's put most of his rounds in the water, but he has hit the hangar very effectively. Forward damage control party, we were responsible for any damage in the front part of the ship. So we had these massive holes in the downtakes for the Olympus engines, which are normally filtered air, and we had holes in the filters. So myself and a young sailor were sent up top with, it was something like Out of the Cruel Sea. We had a bag of softwood bungs and wedges and a rubber mallet. That's what we went to war with. And we closed all these holes as best we could, because as the wood got wet, it would expand and close the holes up. And we worked back to back, with one of us putting the bungs and the wedges in, and the other one looking for the next attack coming in, so that we didn't get shot to pieces while we were doing it. Where I've been below decks listening to all this and being thumped around by the ship moving and this, that and the other, to actually go on the upper deck and to see aircraft coming over, dropping bombs, was a complete different perspective. And I wanted to get back down, to the damage control party, because that all looked a bit tense up top. So that's the sort of damage we sustained, straight through the ship. We weren't armoured, straight through the ship, and then mainly exploding inside with hundreds of pieces of shrapnel. This is one of our flight deck ratings. He's been caught by a bit of shrapnel. He's looking a bit sorry for himself there. He's being patched up in the wardroom. We have 14 injured that first day, nobody killed. Nobody killed on our ship throughout the whole campaign. But we have 14 injured that day. That one's not actually penetrated, so it's probably been fired from quite a distance, but that is the sort of thing you're looking at. Look at the blast that comes out of it. If you'd been standing anywhere near that, you'd have copped a bit of that. And there's a bit more damage. Right. We did actually have sailors shooting at those aircraft with rifles as well. But of course, the most important piece of kit that man's got on there is his Action blue plastic mug. So he can get a cuppa when the canteen comes round. This is Bill Leslie, who was our in charge of our Royal Marines detachment, the luckiest man on board. That hole there would have been about here in him if he hadn't slipped on some empty cases whilst directing fire. He fell on the deck at the same instant that happened. Otherwise, that would have been through his chest, he'd be dead. Not so lucky was HMS Ardent, which we see here. She was subject to raid bombing after bombing after bombing, and as you can see here, she's in a pretty sorry state. She's got to be abandoned. HMS Yarmouth was sent to take the crew off, and the crew of Ardent are there in their orange survival suits, just basically jumping onto Yarmouth. Very brave of Yarmouth's captain to do that, because we didn't know if Ardent was about to explode. We'd been sent there for a bit of anti-aircraft cover. Ardent was on her own to the south, and they really bombed her lots. While we were doing that, another raid came in, and the Ardent's doctor was on the flight deck, sadly tending to a dying man. Bomb came in, exploded. He was blown over the side of the ship into the water. No survival suit, no life jacket. Luckily seen by our bridge crew. We sent a Gemini inflatable out, scooped him out of the water. If he'd gone the other side, he'd have been dead. You haven't got very long in that water at all. So there she is, very, very alight. And we stood by her all night, watched her burn, which was a very sad thing. 22 men died in Ardent. On the 23rd of May, we were sent into Bomb Alley again, and similar sort of routine, but this time we were even more navigationally restrained. The landings of equipment are going on sort of this sort of area. We're claiming another Seawolf hit, but I think quite a few other people had a go at it as well. But we certainly shot a Seawolf at it and it crashed, so we're claiming a bit of that as well. So we had another very, very busy day in Bomalley, being strafed and near missed, and somehow we survived that. Unfortunately, HMS Antelope here got an unexploded bomb on board on that day, and that exploded while they were trying to defuse it overnight. We found out that aluminium burns, because that's what she looked like the next morning, and she broke her back, and she lies now in San Carlos as a war grave. So, three ships have now been sunk. We were 30 miles away from Sheffield. We were very close to Arden, and we were very close to Antelope. We were just, our luck was holding till we get to the 25th of May. I don't need to look at my notes for this because it's ingrained in my memory, the 25th of May. We were operating to the north of Pebble Island, 10 miles north of Pebble Island, with HMS Coventry. We worked with Coventry a lot. She was a Type 42 destroyer. She was the most effective Type 42 destroyer of the conflict, no doubt. She'd shot down many Argentinian aircraft with her Sea Dart system. And in modern speak, I should say, she was on it. So there we were. And the idea was that Coventry, who had a 4.5 gun, we didn't, would shell the troops on Pebble Island. They would ask their Air Force to come out and have a go at us and stop us doing that. And they obliged. They sent 4 aircraft out, 2 pairs. Now, this is taken from the bridge of my ship. I, as usual, was very bravely taking cover 2 decks down with the forward damage control party. A good friend of mine didn't take cover when this was happening. He picked up his camera and took this shot. You're looking at 2 Skyhawks coming in towards us. They popped out 10 miles away from us from the cover of the land. And Coventry, unfortunately, couldn't lock on with her Sea Dart. We had a malfunction with Seawolf because it was analog and didn't have much computing power. I won't go into the ins and outs of that. The bottom line was that our 40mm World War II Bofors, Coventry's 4.5 gun, and any machine gun that was on the bearing at the time were all that were trying to stop these planes coming in. And our luck ran out then. One of those dropped a 1,000-pound bomb. It skipped off the water. It hit us 10 feet above the waterline. It was directed upwards by a longitudinal bulkhead that goes across the ship. And it came out of the flight deck, peeling the decking back like a banana skin, as you can see there, and went over the side without going bang. The spinner on the front of the weapon hadn't turned enough times to arm it, so it just hit us as half a ton of metal and explosive travelling at 450 knots. That's what it did. Had it exploded, I wouldn't be standing here. The back of the ship would have been blown off. Our deep Seawolf magazine, 54 missiles, was right underneath that. They'd have gone up as well, and we'd have just sunk by the stern, and that would have been it. Took the front off the helicopter on the way through, but it's okay. It's okay, don't worry. Our 2 helicopters have been shot up on day 1 in Bomalley. HMS Brilliant, who carried 2 Lynx, lent us one. This is Brilliant's Lynx, or 3/4 of it anyway. Nobody was sitting in it at the time. Nobody was harmed in that picture, thank goodness. But it's a bit of a state, isn't it? And there's a member of the flight looking rather downhearted about what the Argentinians have just done to our flight deck. So that was the first pair came in. This is HMS Coventry, most successful Type 42 of the campaign, as I said. We are steaming line astern, and this time the 2 aircraft came off the land, and we had a firm Seawolf lock on both of them. Seawolf's a short-range system. It only fires, or that particular mark of it, about 5 miles. So we were waiting for the range to come down before opening fire, and perfect. Doesn't get much better than that. We were just waiting for them to come into range. Fog of war, call it what you like. HMS Coventry executed a hard turn to starboard, probably to open up her weapon arcs with this attack coming in, and she turned straight into our fire control radar beams, broke the lock, and unfortunately one of those aircraft put 3 bombs in her, all below the waterline, 2 of which exploded, 500-pounders. When 1,000 pounds of explosive goes off in a ship, that's what happens. That was taken from our bridge. You can see the ferocity of that. This is all below the waterline. So she stopped, we stopped. She doesn't look damaged there, does she? It's a bit of smoke, but she doesn't look damaged. And very soon, that started happening. And that started happening. 10 of us from the Forward Damage Control Party were sent to the upper deck to get our shipmates out of the water. Excuse me. And when I opened the door to the upper deck, that is what I saw, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I was looking at that. She'd moments before been an efficient fighting ship, and now she was rolling over and dying. What she's about to take with her are these, well, not that one, but there's 3 life rafts there. This is our Gemini inflatable. And the crew of that, including one of my midshipman colleagues, took 3 life rafts in tow. Took them 25 minutes to get them back to the ship because they had such a small little outboard on the Gemini. But she was going to take those, Coventry was going to take those life rafts with her if they hadn't done that. She was just going to roll straight onto them. So many, many, many men's lives were saved that day. We put every boat in the water. We put the scrambling nets down. We saved 170 of Coventry sailors. A load of helicopters turned up from San Carlos, picking men out of the water, dropping some on us, taking some back to San Carlos who were badly injured. And within 20 minutes, she looked like that. So of the 4 ships we'd lost in the Falklands, we'd effectively been right next to 3 of them, and we now had a big hole in our back end. That was the end of our adventures inshore. We were sent back out, we were patched up, sent back out and to goalkeep on Hermes for the rest of the conflict. And then came the glorious day we were released, and we started heading north. I know you all want to know. Okay, then. Oh. I know my hair is dreadful, smarter today, but you try getting a barber in the South Atlantic, you can't get one. Now, I've bored you for, that's us saying goodbye to Hermes, our dear old captain. Now, I've bored you for 30 minutes. These poor guys here have heard their old dad going on like this for 31 years. As you can see, didn't put them off joining the service. They're both out now. They're like me, they did, one did 4 years, one did 6 years. I did 5. But we've all taken the experience that the service gives you and used it wisely. You may notice, ma'am, that that's actually Buckingham Palace in the back there. We were very kindly invited to a garden party in 2016. My wife took that picture in complete contravention to what she was told, so I'd say no more. But it's one of my favourite pictures. But thank you very much for listening. It's been an utter pleasure and an honour speaking to you today. Thanks very much.
Your Royal Highness, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Charlie's spoken about what was happening in the South Atlantic. I want to talk to you about the contribution that Wrens were making at this time. In April 1982, I was serving in HMS Nelson in the Education Centre. Like most personnel serving ashore, I was on leave. But on this particular day, I was sitting in my lounge when walking down the path came a leading regulator. Leave had been cancelled, and I had been recalled to carry out the role of assistant to the controller of the Casualty Action Cell based in Bar and Block in HMS Nelson. Our role was to coordinate the lists of casualties and uninjured personnel to go to the welfare centres should any of our ships be hit, something all of us hoped would never happen. The approximately 50-strong cell with both male and female serving personnel had to be set up from scratch. It was amazing how easy it was to get everything we needed without having to fill forms in triplicate. We even obtained an all-singing and dancing printer photocopier, of which we all had to be trained on. The team was split into 2 shifts, each working 24 hours about, something that probably would not happen in this day and age. But it was amazing how quickly we all adjusted to this shift pattern. As part of setting up, we also obtained kitchen equipment, and some of the team were very good at making stews, delicious at 1 o'clock in the morning. Within the cell, there were also representatives of the Army, the RAF, and the Merchant Navy. We discovered that the guy in the Merchant Navy office was a very good knitter, and he was making a lovely Aran jumper. Our cell had direct line to Cinque Fleet at Northwood. We were provided with the lists of all those embarked on the ships sailing south towards the Falklands, including NAFI and the Chinese laundry staff. This also included details of next of kin. As the ship sailed south, we practiced what we would have to do should there be casualties. There was some confusion as some of the ships taken up from trade or stuffed had very strange sounding names. Then on the 4th of May, Sheffield was hit, and what we all hoped would never happen had happened. This stunned us all, but we had a job to do. We received a list from Cinque Fleet of those who were missing, rescued, injured, and known to have died. The information was checked and rechecked against the embarkation lists before being passed to the welfare units for someone to go and visit the family if the person had died or been injured, and others could make calls to families of those who'd been rescued. Each time a ship was hit, we carried out the same process. There were good moments, like finding out that one of the men on the Sheffield missing list had in fact not sailed. He was sitting only yards away from where the Casualty Action Cell was based. In another case, we all monitored someone who was dangerously ill. We were as thrilled as his family when it was reported that he was ready to be flown home. There were some humorous moments too. For example, the captain who was in overall charge arrived one evening to find us all wearing slippers. I think he nearly became a casualty himself. At the end of the conflict, my primary role was to check the lists of personnel being flown home, or those who were coming home on, for example, Canberra, and to let the welfare units know so that families can be informed. A part of my role was to work closely with Chief Wren Barbara Travers, who went to RAF Rawton to meet and support the families of the injured who were being returned to the UK for treatment. Barbara and I never met until we both spoke at the Wrens BT AGM in 1983, attended by Your Royal Highness. It is interesting to note that in her book, Britannia's Daughters, Ursula Stewart Mason says that it was probably more of an ordeal than the heavy workload earlier. I obviously did okay, because here I am again today. Finally, I was immensely proud to be one of 4 Wrens awarded the British Empire Medal for our roles during the Falkland conflict. The others were Kim Toms, a dental hygienist, Jackie Mitten, leading Wren stores, and Barbara Travers, Chief Wren Family Services. We were only 4 representatives of the many Wrens that supported the fleet during the conflict. Thank you.
I'd now like to ask Lieutenant Commander Jane Pitsey to provide the vote of thanks to both our speakers.
Your Royal Highness, honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honour to offer the vote of thanks to our 2 wonderful guest speakers. Unfortunately, Charlie stole my sandwiches when I was going to show you this picture. What a handsome young man he was. Is. So as you know, before I do these votes of thank, I do a bit of social media stalking, which isn't easy when you're having to investigate somebody who's still a serving police officer or somebody who likes to keep their own pictures private, so I couldn't get a picture of you. But what struck me listening to Charlie and when I was researching his experience is that, you know, he was an officer still under training. He was under 19 years old. I mean, some of us have got court shoes younger than him. Older than him, I should say. I also heard that whilst in St Carlos Water, his captain, who sounds like a really good leader of men, had set them to task writing an essay to complete their fleet board training. Now, I think that was probably a good leadership tactic to distract his young sailors and officers. And to be quite honest with you, reading through and listening to you today, I was in a bit of a pot mess, I'm not going to lie. So really, by the time your ship was positioned in San Carlos waters, you mentioned how you would have already had the signal that your friend Andrew had been killed on HMS Sheffield. And that is something as well that would have struck a lot of people in this audience, how you all remained focused despite hearing of friends and colleagues that would have lost their lives during that period. You know, between the 21st and the 25th of May, the period that you were in Bomb Alley, you know, just knowing that 22 died in Ardent, 2 in Antelope and 19 in Coventry, it's a really sobering thought. And however, Broadsword played her part, a glorious Type 22, by saving 170 of the ship's company from HMS Coventry. And the sight of hearing you describe the sight of HMS Coventry heeling over in front of your very eyes was really difficult to hear. And what I'd really like to say is thank you so much for your continued courage to relay your experience, one that no parent or any other person would want to hear their 18-year-old son have to relay, proper job or not. So your service has, you know, allowed the British citizens to remain free, and you continue to serve protecting Her Majesty's citizens and, in fact, members of her own family. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Wrens Benevolent Trust for giving us your experience. Thank you. So, Anne. thank you very much for relaying your story that quite often is lost, and many of us in this room will have known people that were serving in the Royal Navy at the time, whether they were loved ones, brothers, mainly brothers, or husbands or partners. So to set up that 50-strong cell, and Charlie talked about 69 days in Defence Watches, 6 on, 6 off. I can't imagine doing 24-hour shifts. It must have taken a bit of getting used to. But whilst you were working there, it must have been incredibly difficult for you and your colleagues to know that many of your friends were out there. And I also understand that even one person above where you used to work, her husband served in HMS Sheffield, so it must have been incredibly difficult. And I'm sure that many people in this room would have had similar experiences. But I'm really grateful for what you did, and we really enjoyed hearing about your role. And the other women, as well, including the women that served on SS Uganda, which are quite often forgotten about, the nurses that served at the time. The stew, do you think it contained new potatoes? And on behalf of myself and the rest of the Wrens Benevolent Trust, thank you very much for spending your time telling us about your experience. Thank you.
Jane, thank you. So finally, I would like to thank you all for joining us today, and I hope to see you at next year's 81st Annual General Meeting. If you wish to relive this experience or know of other former Wrens who could not join us today, then do remember that a film of this event will be uploaded onto the Trust website in due course. Thank you.
All the fact that I could take this way. Yeah. It's very comforting to know. Not at all. Very well run ship. And she has got 10 years just to come on and trust you. We've tried to capture everybody's sort of thoughts and wishes, the best of the nature. We have pulled it all together, so that's the character. We are nearly there. Just what the final bit of analysis of the together, and then we'll have a paper for the trustees. Some of the mentions actually are reviews, because the other way will eventually close the animal health trust, because some charities are never going to recover from that kind of. I think we did get up to a couple of weeks ago. Thank you for joining us. Fly around.